Introduction and Installing DNS. The Domain Name System, or DNS, is a method of resolving IP addresses to English-sounding names. But in the days of NT4, DNS was really not all that important as far as your network went. After all, you had WINs to handle your name resolution requirements. But in today's Windows 2000 and Windows 2003 world, you need to have DNS functioning in your environment. In fact, DNS is an integral part of Active Directory and is the foundation of your Windows network. So does this mean that we can get away with WINs? Well, maybe. That largely will depend on whether you have older Windows clients hanging around or software that requires the NetBIOS name resolution to function. If you're one of the lucky few that only has Windows 2000 XP and 2003 machines in your network, then quite possibly the answer would be yes. So let's start by looking into this thing called DNS. A DNS name really only consists of two parts. The leftmost part is the computer name, and everything else to the right is the domain suffix. So for our server here, server 02 is the computer name and testdomain.com is the domain suffix. So how does DNS really work? Well, a DNS structure is a hierarchical structure that starts out with a root domain, which is designated by a period or a dot. The root domain is operated by a non-profit group called the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN. Now, beneath the root domains are several other domains, .com, .net, .org, .gov, and so on. These are referred to as top-level domains, or TLDs. The control of the domains at this level have been delegated to other companies to manage. So, for example, Network Solutions manages the .com domain. So for me to own and operate my own domain, such as testdomain.com, I would have to get permission from Network Solutions. Now, I would do this, of course, by jumping onto their website, providing a few details about me, and then giving them some credit card information. Now, in return, they give me the rights to operate the testdomain.com domain. Now, I really don't own the domain, consider it a lease arrangement, but as long as I'm not infringing on any trademark with my choice of domain name, and of course, as long as I continue to pay for the right to use it, then you can effectively consider it mine. Now, from this point onwards, I can create as many subdomains as I like. ICANN delegated the .com to Network Solutions. Network Solutions delegated testdomain.com to me. Now, if I want to create another subdomain, such as sales.testdomain.com, I don't have to ask anyone permission. I can just create it myself, as I control everything from testdomain.com upwards. Alright, so let's move on and we'll go and install DNS. So to install DNS, we'll go and click on Start, and then we'll select Manage Your Server. We'll come over here and select Add or Remove a Role. And this starts up the Configure Your Server wizard, so we'll click Next. And now we're presented with a list of roles that we have and those that we can choose. So we'll select DNS and we'll choose Next. Now we're just presented with a summary of what we're about to do, which is install our DNS server and then run our Configure a DNS Server wizard. So we'll choose Next, and the wizard will start installing DNS. So make sure that you do have your Windows 2003 CD-ROM in the drive, because it will need some files from the CD. Now, once those files have copied, you'll be presented with the Configure a DNS Server wizard, as you see here. Now, in the middle here we have a DNS checklist button, and this will take us to some online help information should you need it. So go and have a read through that if you get stuck. But we'll get moving on and we'll choose Next. Now we need to tell the wizard what type of DNS server that this will be. Now, we can create a forward lookup zone only, and this will enable us to manage a DNS server for our local network and then forward any name resolution queries that are outside our network, such as an external website, out to an external DNS server, like our ISPs, for example. Now, if you have a small business or a home-based DNS server, you'd probably want to choose this setting. Next, we can create forward and reverse lookup zones. Now, this is basically the same as above, but it will create a reverse lookup zone as well, and it won't by default forward queries out to another server. Now, the final option is to configure root hints only, and then we have to manually do all of the other configuration ourselves. So for our purposes, we're going to choose the last option so we can go ahead and show you how to do all of this stuff manually. So we'll click Next. Okay, our wizard's complete. It's pretty quick, this one, as basically all that it had to do was configure a root hints text file. So we'll click on Finish, and we can see that our server is now a DNS server. Now what we actually have here right now is a caching only DNS server, and we can verify that DNS is working. But the first thing we should do is configure our local DNS client to point to the DNS server to handle name resolution. So we'll click Finish, and then you should open up the properties of your network card. So we'll click on Properties. We'll come down here and we'll select Internet Protocol and choose Properties. Now because this is our DNS server, our server has the IP address of 192.168.0.11. So down here, you should set your preferred DNS server to the same IP address. And that's so this computer as a client can use itself, its DNS server component, to handle name resolution. Okay, well let's go and see if our DNS is working. We'll click on Start and we'll open up a command prompt. And now we'll just go and ping www.yahoo.com. Okay, and there we can see that we are getting a response. So why is that? We haven't actually created any zones or any forwarders, so how did our new DNS server find the IP address of Yahoo's website? Well, if you recall, we chose the last option when we configured our new DNS server, and it created the root hints file. Now technically, that's all our DNS server needs to begin resolving names on the internet. So what happened is, our DNS server went up to the root servers and asked for the DNS server for yahoo.com. And it was told to go to the .com servers, which it did, and then it found the DNS servers for Yahoo. It then sent a request to the Yahoo DNS server and said, hey, what's the IP address for your web server? The Yahoo DNS server told our DNS server the IP address for their web server. Then our new DNS server cached the response, passed it back to the DNS client on this machine, which also cached it, then our ping succeeded. So there you can see the power of the root hints file in action. So let's go and take a further look into this, and we'll install the Microsoft Network Monitor, and we'll capture a few packets that involve DNS and see what it can tell us about what our DNS server is doing. So we'll go and click on Start, Control Panel, Add or Remove Programs. And then we'll come over here and click on Add Remove Windows Components. Okay, now we'll scroll down and we'll double click on Management and Monitoring Tools, and then we'll select Network Monitor Tools. We'll click OK and we'll click Next. Now make sure you have your Windows 2003 CD-ROM in the drive, because it will need to copy some files from the CD. Now I'll just pause this video for a moment. We'll return once the files have copied. Okay, the installation is complete, so we'll click on Finish. And we'll just go and close these windows down. And now we'll click on Start, Administrative Tools, and then we'll launch the Network Monitor utility. Now as this is a new installation, it will ask us what interface we need to capture on. So we'll click OK to dismiss this message, we'll expand our local computer, and we'll select our local area connection. And then we'll click on OK. Okay, I'll just expand this window here. And now we'll go and start a packet capture by clicking on the Start button, which looks a little like a DVD play button. Okay, so let's go back to our command prompt and we'll ping a host. Now I don't know, what about if we ping www.nec.com? Okay, now whether we actually get a reply or not doesn't really matter. We're only looking at DNS resolution, so as long as we see an IP address listed here, that's fine by me. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go and stop this packet capture. And then I'll hit F12, which will bring up the packet capture view. Okay, now this is a little messy here. As you can see, we captured a fair amount in such a short space of time. What I'll do is click on this little funnel looking icon, and this brings up the display filter. Now I'm just going to double click on Protocol Any, and I'll select to disable all, and that'll remove all of the protocols, and now we can actually filter in the ones that we want. So I'm going to double click on DNS, and I'll scroll down and I'll choose ICMP, and then I'll click on OK and then OK again. Okay, so now in our window we can only see DNS packets and ICMP packets. So I'll scroll over here to the right, and here we can see a bunch of IP addresses. Now the first one over here in the source address list is my DNS server that sent out a query for the IP address of NEC's website. Now as my DNS server already knew the IP address of the .com servers, we found that a minute ago when we pinged yahoo.com, it's pretty safe to assume that this IP address here is one of those servers. So we'll go to our command prompt and we'll perform an NS lookup on this IP address here to try and find out what it is. So we'll go to our command prompt and we'll type in NS lookup followed by the IP address, and we can see that the response that comes back is a top level domain server. Now I'll just move this command prompt window down a little bit. Now next we can see we actually did have an error that the server was unable to interpret the format, but if we come down to the next one here, we can see, okay, our server 01 sent that request straight back again to find out what the IP address of NEC's DNS servers are. Of course, the top level domain server then responded. You can see over here we have a query response from the same IP address back to our server. Now inside that response contained the IP address of NEC's DNS servers. So our next entry here is for our server 01, which has gone out to try and query this IP address here. So let's go and take a look at what that IP address actually corresponds to. So we'll type in NS lookup followed by the IP address of 143.101.0.20 and we'll hit enter. And we can see the response that comes back is dns1.nec.com. So that's a DNS server for NEC. Now at this point, the DNS server for NEC responded back to our server with the IP address of the machine named www that lives inside the nec.com domain. And of course our server then went and issued a ping off to that website. Okay, so in this video we've introduced you to DNS. We've installed our DNS server but only with a basic root hints file. And we've demonstrated how a basic DNS server configured just with root hints can go out and resolve internet host names properly. In this video series on DNS, we'll also discuss how to administer your DNS server and to start resolving our local queries by creating zones.